Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian from Sports Info Solutions, joined as always by Aaron Schatz of Football Outsiders. Aaron, how's your off-season been going?
My off-season has been busy, like many off-seasons are, putting together the book, putting together everything on the site, but I am ready for real football. I am past the world of the preseason, and I'm ready for games that really count.
Well, we should pause for 1 second there because you mentioned your site, and it looks awesome. You guys had a huge redesign, huh?
Yes, finally, we look good on mobile devices, and I'm very excited about it. And
you always look good on mobile devices whenever we FaceTime.
Well, thank you. That's me personally, but the site looks good on mobile devices now. And we've made a lot of changes. There's a few more left to come. Some things that people have asked for, like more sortable tables, and it is exciting. I'm excited to have the site looking a lot better.
And one more thing, just to clear up for everybody this off season. I know there was a lot of nerves about Football Outsiders making moves. There's now a relationship with Edge Sports. Can you explain that a little bit?
So yes, Edge Sports purchased Football Outsiders. So we are now a division of Edge Sports. For those who don't know, Edge Sports is an analytics firm in Louisville, Kentucky. They're part of a larger company called Edge Analytics that also does analytics in the healthcare and education spaces. They've done consulting for a few teams, including the Philadelphia Eagles, and we're sort of going to be the business to consumer section of that company at this point. But there aren't really any big changes to Football Outsiders. All the Football Outsiders writers you know and love have stayed the same, with the exception of Charles McDonald, who's gone on to a full-time job at Bleacher Report. And we're still doing DVOA and all the stats you love. We've still got a relationship with Sports Info Solutions, as you can hear from this podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet, you should make sure to go to Football Outsiders now and get your annual subscription to the Sports Info Solutions charting stats and the weekly fantasy projections, which we are offering once again this year. And not a lot of big changes other than the site looking way, way better than it ever has. Otherwise, I'm ready to go into 2018 and just do all the great analytics that I'm used to doing from all the other years.
All right, so let's jump right into the numbers, shall we? One big topic of conversation in the analytical community and the Twitter football world this offseason was run versus pass. And does running have any value at all? And there are some people that are coming way out and are saying, forget about running. It's only a passing league now. Passing plays are the only plays that are important. And of course, there's the traditional pushback, which it takes all different kind of shapes and sizes. But I'm wondering where you stand on this debate, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, I think that the debate actually has two parts. The first part of the debate is does running have any value? The second part of the debate is, do running backs have any value? Because I think that those are two separate questions, right? There's some research about how much are individual running backs important to the success of a running game versus the offensive line versus how the defense has set up. But that doesn't necessarily mean running is not effective or running is not important. I will say that I come in on the side of the idea that passing is much more important than running, and that NFL teams run too much and don't pass enough. But I don't think that running is totally pointless because, first of all, there are some times that because of the weakness of the opposing defense, it is more efficient to run. Second, there's certain down and distance situations, namely third and short and fourth and short, where it's more efficient to run. And third, I think you have to run sometimes or else the other team is just going to play like 7 defensive backs all the time. You've got to be able to have some threat of the run, right? I know that one of the pieces of research we did like 10 years ago, and it's been redone numerous times, and Ben Baldwin redid it again this offseason, shows that how good you are at running does not at all affect how good you are at play action passing. That being said, if you had a team that never, ever, ever ran the ball, ever, play action passing wouldn't work. There has to be some threat of the run, or else the concept of play action passing doesn't work.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I probably agree with you that teams certainly run more often than they should. I think that it's really, really difficult if you kind of just look at the expected point value that you literally find on what you gain from a passing play, how many yards you can expect to gain per play, all that kind of stuff. That to say that you in a perfect, with game theory involved, if you were to think about it that way, in a perfect world, you would have an equal efficiency of run plays and pass plays. And until we found that equal efficiency, we could say that we're unbalanced, right?
Right, and I think that if I remember correctly, if you use yards per play as your measure of efficiency, there are some times in the mid 70s where it is in fact equal, but it has never been equal ever since then. And so I think that there's no question that teams need to pass more often. And I should give a shout out, like one of the really great pieces of research this year, although it was posted mostly on Twitter, and I will say, I'm not quite sure why great research should be posted mostly on Twitter rather than in concrete articles that you can sort of link to in perpetuity.
Well, because it's 2018, that's why.
Now, I guess, but I would rather have an article that you could link to in perpetuity and then Twitter links to it. But I do have to give a lot of credit to Josh Hermsmeyer, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who had did a phenomenal amount of research this offseason using Sports Info Solutions data. And one of the things he discovered was the massive importance of how the defense is set up to how successful the running game is. And the idea that he found was that 80% of the success of a running game could be determined solely by how many men were in the box. And that's not even the difference between how many blockers and how many men in the box. It's just how many men in the box.
Right.
It's just how crowded is the box. The more crowded the box, the less successful running is going to be. And it's a remarkable finding.
So I remember we were with Charles McDonald at the Combine last year, and he was talking a lot about just that kind of box plus minus, we were calling it. Do you have more than one player than them? Do you have less than one player compared to them? And it's a fascinating concept. And what I love about Josh and his research, and really he's done such amazing stuff, along with yourself, he's probably doing some of the coolest stuff out there in the public sphere with the SIS data. And what I love about Josh is that he's absolutely obsessed with historical validity, that something is repeatable and it's going to be predictive of the future. And when he looked into this, that finding about the number of box defenders by the defense, it's really staggering. It's intuitive. It's not like anybody's going to say, oh yeah, I thought it was better to run with a total packed box. But to the extent that it was true, I think that kind of caught everybody a little bit off guard.
No, it's the extent of it that's the shock. It's not the fact of it that's the shock. It's the extent of it. It's that it seems to determine so much of run success. And it means that you want to spread the teams out. You want to spread the offense out if you're going to run. And then you get to teams like the Rams last year, right? I think the Rams ran more than any other team from an 11 personnel, right? Their percentage of run plays, their run pass ratio from 11 personnel was the highest in the league. So they would spread you out so you weren't loading the box against them, and then they would run against you. And I mean, I ran some quick DVOA numbers just to try to sort of show where Josh's research, how that was reflected in DVOA. And it's kind of astonishing, right? The average DVOA and average DVOA for running is less than 0. Because we throw all plays together, both runs and passes. And of course, passes tend to be positive and runs tend to be negative. With 5 in the box, it's 1%. With 6 in the box, it's minus 8%. With 7 in the box, it's minus 12%. And with 8 in the box, it's minus 17%.
Wow.
So that's just a basic. And if you want to go yards per carry, it goes 5.3, 4.2, 3.9, 3.8. So that's just a basic look at how important the men in the box thing is. But what's remarkable about Josh is that he does a lot of regression. He's a very well-trained statistician, as opposed to being someone like me, who's more of a writer who messes around with statistics. So it was very important to him to show the sort of the R squared and what the percentages are, and the fact that he came out with the idea that 80% of success in the running game can be attributed solely to number of men in the box. And it goes with another finding that we found over the last couple of years that I think really shocks people when I talk about it. And this comes out in the Football Outsiders stat projections that we do for teams every year. And that is that run defense is more consistent from year to year than pass defense. It sort of all goes together with sort of a general theory that the defense may determine the success of runs more than the offense does, while the offense determines the success of passes more than the defense does. That's why pass defense is so much more inconsistent than run defense is. And it makes logical sense if you think of things the way Brian Burke from ESPN once put it to me, which is that football is a weird combination of an individual sport with a team sport, because the quarterback has so much importance, and the quarterback plays such an important role in offense that it's sort of partially an individual sport and partially a team sport. And that kind of goes with that combines with Josh's research, combines with the stuff we've done about run versus pass consistency to sort of suggest the idea that the quarterback, right, has such a huge role in the offense and a huge role in how successful you are passing, but rushing is much more about the defense, and then from an offensive perspective, much more about the offensive line than it is about the back himself.
So let me flip that on its head just a little bit, because also I think the quarterback skill is going to be super repeatable from year to year, and the quarterbacks that distinguish themselves are going to be the guys that distinguish themselves. I think that goes hand in hand with what you're saying. I think the run defense thing comes down more to the fact that there are less moving parts in the run game than in the pass game. And I think that's why it's more repeatable year over year. And so a little bit of, yeah, you could look at that as the defense has the ability to dictate by how many people that they're putting in the box. But also, I believe in building, inside out, up front first for a reason. And that's because I played wide receiver, I played safety, and I know that I wasn't involved on a lot of plays. But, those guys that were in the trenches, there's not a play that they're not an important part of. And to me, that's the run defense that statistically probably is kind of teasing that out, what you're saying there.
Right. The quality of the guys in the trenches and the frequency with which you load the guys in the trenches, right? Some of that has to do with what the defensive scheme is, and some of it has to do with what the quality of those guys are. Absolutely.
So let's dive back. So we were talking about the effectiveness of rushing versus passing, which you pointed out is different than the effectiveness of running backs or not. But let's look at this rushing versus passing thing. So one thing that I noticed that kind of surprised me actually when I was looking into some of the Football Outsider statistics is that success rate is actually calculated differently for running backs than it is for corners. Is that right?
Yeah. That's an old school thing that I've done from the beginning that I'm probably going to change soon. It's based on back when no one else was really using success rate except for us.
Well, you invented
it, right? Sorry, what?
I think you invented it. Is that not true?
I will give the credit to the men from Hidden Game of Football.
Nice.
Pete Palmer, John Thorne, and Bob Carroll. That is where I first encountered success rate. I think we popularized it, would be a better way to put it.
You're so generous.
What the idea was to try to think like a coach, right? And I think that what a coach considers success by a running back is different from what might actually be successful from like an expected points added point of view.
Right. So,
but with more people using success rate, I think at some point soon we're probably going to move away from that.
So just to clarify, success rate, the way you do it is on first down, it's a running back getting 40% of the yards. But for a cornerback, it would be saving 45% of the yards, not allowing less than 45% of the yards.
Right. The main success rate that we use, the thing that's in DVOA, the thing that we use for cornerbacks and stuff, is the 45, 60, and 100.
Right.
But the running back one is a little bit different, and it comes from the idea that coaches will accept a little less from running backs and still think that they're keeping the offense on schedule. And
maybe that's fair because you have less volatility with a running play. You have less of a chance of a turnover. And this is a lot of the arguments that the old school people that want to argue in favor of the running game will say. And along with the fact that, I'd rather have my offensive line play aggressively and hit the defensive line than have them play on their heels and pass protect. If I could choose, just as an offensive coordinator.
Yeah, the running back one, the running back success rate that we use also has changes in the fourth quarter based on what the score is, which regular success rate doesn't include.
So it is kind of interesting that intuitively, years and years ago, you and the hidden game of football guys all saw this difference in what you need out of success rate to call a play successful for a run and a pass. And now here we are, and we're starting to really talk about how, well, you get a different, average yards per play from a run and for a pass. And, we have all these arguments and people going all the way out and saying we should only be passing at this point in time. Um, kind of
Well, the question is, were we measuring what makes an offensive play successful, or were we measuring what coaches think makes an offensive play successful? I mean, I'll fully admit the reason why the standards for the running back success rate are a little lower came from trying to think like coaches. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a 4-yard run is a successful play in terms of the team offense.
Right. And that's a great segue into the conversation about expected points added, which is something that Sports Info Solutions, we've been working on a lot over the offseason. Alex Vigderman took the lead on that project. I know Keegan Abdu did a lot of work on it. I've chipped in on that project. And basically what we've been doing is refined our expected points model, which basically tells you, so expected points added. Before the play started, how many points are we expected to score on the drive? After the play ended, how many points are we expected to score? What's the difference? That's how many expected points we added. This kind of implicitly does the same thing that success rate is doing. It's taking into account the down and distance situation in terms of, okay, you gained 5 yards. Was it 2nd and 8? Or was it 2nd and 3? Because those are really different things. So what we find actually when we start to look into our expected points model is that it's actually kind of in between this 60-40 and or 45%, 60% splits. And what we find is depending on where you are on the field, there's a different threshold for even the same down and distances. So 1st and 10 backed up on your own 10 is different than 1st and 10 at the 50 is different than 1st and 10 going in. And in fact, what we see is actually you need more yards to have an effective play closer to the end zone that you get and fewer yards given the same down and distance situation in the middle of the field. So it's kind of an interesting added layer of specificity. And, we've invented our own kind of what we call positive play percent. And positive play percent is essentially success rate, but dependent on did you have a positive EPA or a negative EPA. So it's been really interesting to look into that. And I've certainly been doing a lot of thinking in the context of, wow, intuitively success rate was made different because of the way coaches look at the game. There's obviously some risk assessment that needs to be incorporated when we say that passing is just blanket more efficient than running. But at the end of the day, I'm with you in that we're moving in the direction year to year. We're passing more and more, and we're moving in the direction of finding that kind of tipping point of where we've gone too far towards passing. But all evidence is that we're not there yet, and we're going to see passing continue to grow more and more, especially as these rule changes continue to take hold.
Yeah, passing dipped last year. It was a weird year where passing dipped and success on offense dipped a little bit across the league. But I really think that was a 1-year fluke because of the number of top quarterbacks who were injured last year. And I would fully expect for that to reverse this year and for passing to go up again and for scoring to go up again.
I'm with you there. One last thing I'll add on this topic is when you look into expected points stuff, sometimes you see a lot of different models. A lot of people have different definitions for expected points. I believe it was invented by the aforementioned Brian Burke, who's now with ESPN. But sometimes you will see people quoting things saying, a 6-yard gain on 1st and 10 was actually a negative play, so you should only pass. I saw that one actually. Somebody tweeted on the opposing 11, a 6-yard gain on 1st and 10 is a negative play. And that one really drove me nuts until I went and I actually chased Alex down and I said, can you run this on our model and tell me what's really going on here? And according to our model, we actually do have that as a positive play. So what we've been able to do, what Alex has been able to do specifically is really smooth it out so that in these kind of weird situations where some people's models have been giving you results that just don't pass the smell test, which is certainly my main pet peeve in football analytics. Um, it seems that we've put together a model that's a little bit more realistic about what you can expect in terms of, okay, this jives with what every football coach I've ever talked to would say.
The other thing to remember is that this is not just a 1-0 digital yes or no success thing, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like DVOA, and sort of one of the things I put into DVOA when I created it was, we had success rate. We were looking at success rate, but the fact is a 4-yard carry on a 1st and 10 may not be a successful play by EPA, but it's a much more successful play than a 0-yard
Right.
carry.
There's magnitude.
And a 7-yard pass is successful and a 20-yard pass is successful, but they're successful in different magnitudes. So you have to remember that this is all a scale, that this is all a spectrum, that it's not a binary, a digital 1-0. And success rate can be a very useful stat, but you have to have other stats alongside it because it is important to get big plays and to avoid big losses. And it's better to have small, almost successes than to have losses that are definite not successes.
Right. Well, whether you use success rate in DVOA or expected points added and positive play percent, at the end of the day, we want to get in the end zone. So let's just do that and let's move ahead and start talking about these games that we've got coming up this weekend. Can't wait to get into some football. Aaron, all right, as we do, what are the most important games of the week according to playoff odds? All 17 weeks away from it, we are.
Yeah, I was going to say, I almost didn't run this because it was like, can you do most important games early on? But you can, in fact, do most important games early on. There are not a lot of division games this week, which is why some of these most important games of the week are a little bit of a surprise. I'll count them down from 3 to 1. The third most important game of the week is the opener, Thursday night, Atlanta and Philadelphia. The second most important game, and this is a shock to me, is Pittsburgh at Cleveland. And the number one most important game of the week is the LA Football Clippers and the Kansas City Chiefs.
All right. Well, let's take them in order. So let's start with that. The opener, Atlanta, Philadelphia. Obviously, Nick Foles is going to be starting at quarterback there for the Super Bowl champs. Famously, I believe you only incorporate quarterbacks in your projections. Is that correct?
Yeah, quarterbacks have a special variable in the projections, and they get projected separate from the team, and then that gets added into the team offensive projection. But Foles is an interesting one because the way that I tend to project, I kind of tweaked Foles a bit because the way I project is based on regular season statistics. And Foles was horrible during the regular season last year. And then he was fantastic during the playoffs. And again, I mean, I feel like I said this going into the Super Bowl.
I just had a flashback. I was going to say 8 months ago. I remember you saying this.
But my feeling is that the real Nick Foles is somewhere in between those two extremes.
My theory is that the Nick Foles that we like to shows up when he's getting good plays called for him. And I think a lot of the read option.
Then what were they doing in the last 3 weeks of the regular season?
Hey, smokescreen. I guess it was a smokescreen and it worked out.
Maybe.
Well, definitely an interesting game there. What are you looking forward to seeing in that game?
Well, going into this year, my feeling about Atlanta is the Atlanta offense was a little underrated last year. They were better than they looked because they played a really low number of drives comparatively, and they started far back because their defense had so few takeaways and they didn't have good special teams except for the kicker. And so I don't think that they need to get their offense fixed in the way that some people think. I think the problem with Atlanta is they need to get their defense fixed. That defense has so much talent on it. And yet for 2 years now, it has very distinctly been less than the sum of its parts. And we keep waiting for when the actual performance of the Atlanta defense is going to match the amount of talent that we think is on the Atlanta defense.
Yeah, I'm with you there. You see a ton of athleticism, and definitely those guys helped them ride to the Super Bowl. But I think on both sides,
they got hot in that second half of that year. But still, for the full year, for the last couple of years, they're like 22nd or something in defensive DVOA.
Yeah, and that seems to be kind of the deal with the Falcons in general right now. To me, this year feels like a real kind of it can go one way or the other with the Falcons because last year was too like lukewarm. The offense took a step back without Shanahan. I don't think anybody would argue about that. But another thing I don't think people realize is just how good a year Matt Ryan did have. It wasn't the same year that he had the year before. But when we look at a lot of our models and a lot of the stuff that looks into attributing quarterback play to the quarterback specifically, Matt Ryan had a good year and he had to withstand a whole bunch of drops from his receiving group, which included great play from Julio Jones, but he had his share of drops too. So you look at both sides of the ball and it's like, something's not exactly clicking here. Something's not exactly right. I could see this year going in one of two directions with the Falcons. They could be right back in the hunt like they were a couple years ago, or I could see this getting ugly if they can't find an identity on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see this team dropping into the 5-11, 6-10 type range. I just feel like there's just way too much talent for that, unless there's just a huge number of injuries. But
The division is the one thing I'd say to counter
their
that. The
schedule
division's
is one of
tough.
the 2 or 3 hardest schedules in the league. Yeah.
So it could sneak up on them. You'd hate to see, especially an injury to one of those guys on offense that I mentioned or anything like that.
Philly is great. Philly is one of our top projected teams for this year. It was really kind of odd in the book. I think people thought it was odd that we had Dallas slightly ahead of them. We no longer have Dallas slightly ahead of them because of the offensive line problems in Dallas. We now have Dallas second to Philadelphia in the NFC East, but it was because we had Dallas surprisingly high. It wasn't because we had Philadelphia low or anything. I think there's a ton of talent on this team. Like I said, I don't think Nick Foles is as good as Carson Wentz. I think the likelihood is he won't be as good as he was in the playoffs, but that he will be better than he was at the end of last regular season. And on average, over the last few years, I realized last year the Patriots lost that opening game. But on average, I believe that the team that hosts that opening Thursday night game wins by something like 3 points more than the line. So I like Philadelphia on Thursday night.
All right, I'll be a naysayer there and give me some of the Falcons. I'll take points.
Yeah, the points are down to like 2.5 though.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why you got me. I'm not a betting man.
I will say another game where the points have dropped is that Pittsburgh at Cleveland game.
All right, so Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and I know the season finale of Hard Knocks I think airs tonight, but I don't think we're going to be spoiling anything for anybody listening to the Off the Charts podcast to talk about how devastated we all were to learn that Devin Kajust was cut.
Hopefully, the man has a future in the league.
Well, a funny story about Kajust. Actually, when I was in between my time in the league with the Saints and the Browns and arriving at SIS, I was doing grad school. I was doing a graduate program in New York, and I was working with an agency doing some scouting for them. And we actually had the pleasure of having a meeting with Devin Kajust's father. And I can't tell you details of that meeting, but I can tell you it was one of the most pleasurable experiences of my life. And I was very happy to see the return of Mr. Kajust on Hard Knocks.
Yes, it's been an interesting, fun season. It's too bad that a lot of the featured players didn't end up making the roster.
Yeah, they're all getting cut. Really sad ending coming tonight.
I'm not spoiling anything because
all of our listeners know.
No, we've all seen what the final rosters look
like.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think the other thing that you really get this feeling from Hard Knocks, and some other people have talked about this, is the sort of shakiness of Hugh Jackson's position and the idea that Greg Williams and Todd Haley, seem to both be angling for the starting, for the head coaching job that might open up there. And that's, there's so many statistical reasons to believe that Cleveland is going to be a much better team this year. And I go through so many of them in the Cleveland chapter of Football Outsiders Almanac. But the big subjective hold your horses on this is the coaching staff. There's just so many questions about that coaching staff and the schemes that they use. And one of the ones using SIS data that we highlighted was that nobody used base defense more against 11 personnel. And if they do that on Sunday, when Pittsburgh comes out with 11 personnel now with James Washington probably as the slot receiver, the rookie, the kid out of Oklahoma State, oh my God, they're going to get creamed because Pittsburgh is going to throw the ball all over the field. And it's interesting. The projection for Cleveland is kind of based on that stuff that I was saying about run defense being more consistent than pass defense, because the Cleveland run defense was spectacular last year. But if the only reason it was spectacular was that they kept playing base defense against 11 personnel and stuff, then it's probably not a good thing that their run defense is more consistent from year to year, because teams are just going to pass all over them.
Yeah, looking at the Browns, there's, I think, reason for excitement with a lot of the talent that they have that's coming on that team, and there's also some sort of head scratching that's got to be going on with some of the way that the coaching staff has come off on the show. I can tell you from my 4 years in New Orleans that Greg Williams is not hamming it up for the cameras. Greg Williams is hamming it up for Greg Williams. That is Greg Williams. That is who he is. He is being himself. Now, you can hate it or love it, and I think most people would choose the prior. But one thing you can't say is that he's acting. I think most people will be shocked to know that this is not just HBO Greg Williams. That's really him. And Todd Haley Todd Haley must have been hired by HBO to be on this show, to be, the antagonists of one another. It's been very entertaining to me.
I'm not shocked that Greg Williams is really like that. I'm much more shocked at the type of defensive schemes that he runs. An NFL coach screaming at his players all the time doesn't shock me too much.
Well, the schemes that he runs, it's going to be about getting free rushers, right? You heard him talking about that, and sort of what did he do to make the defense successful? Not about necessarily empowering the players like some other coaches might do.
Our most important game of the week is the Kansas City Chiefs at the Los Angeles Chargers in beautiful soccer StubHub Stadium. And the Kansas City is a very difficult team to project. I feel pretty safe projecting that their defense is not going to be good. But their offense, there's a lot of talent there. But we just don't know what to expect from Mahomes. He's effectively a rookie, even though he was the top Q-base projected quarterback from his class. You still don't know what you're going to get. That doesn't necessarily mean that a guy is going to be really good in his first taste as a starter. And that's what makes Kansas City really difficult to project. But we now, in our updated projections, we have the AFC West as the closest division in the league, with 0.7 of a win separating the average wins of the Chargers from the average wins of the Denver Broncos in fourth place.
Wow. Really? The Raiders?
Yeah. We had the Raiders basically tied. We had the Raiders basically tied with the Chargers in the book. Because remember, the Raiders went 12-4 just 2 years ago. And a lot of those players are still there on offense, right? But then when you take Khalil Mack out, yeah, they've fallen behind Kansas City now in our projections. So we now have a Chargers, Chiefs, Raiders, Broncos.
I like the Raiders and my childhood Dolphins up there in the list of teams that I don't really want to watch at all this year.
Well, but the Dolphins are different. I feel like the Dolphins are, because they're going to be really dull. The Dolphins have a lot of acceptable, competent football players and no stars at all.
Yeah, they got rid of them all.
Xavier Rhodes, right? Not Xavier Rhodes. Sorry, that's the guy on Minnesota. Who's the guy? Xavier Howard?
Xavier Howard, yep.
Right? Who's not even a star, but should be if he takes the step forward this year. I think he'll be at that quality. And they've got a running back, but he's not like a star running back. Drake, and he's he's gonna lose carries to go. There's a lot of competency there with Miami.
That is not a word I would use to describe the organization at all.
There's nothing exciting. There's no star. You have to put the competent players around, because there's some players that aren't that competent, and you have to put them around stars. So they just seem like such a 7-9 team to me. I remember they're getting their starting quarterback back, so things are going to be better for them. But my God, they just seem like the most boring team. The most boring team in the league this year is either Cincinnati or Miami, as far as 7-9 mediocrity.
Well, two great quarterbacks for mediocrity, Andy Dalton and Ryan Tannehill, no doubt about it. They better hope that Tannehill can come back and be good, because if not, the cupboard is bare behind him.
Right, and that's another problem with Miami is, again, there's just there's an exciting young cornerback, and then and there's like a 30,000-year-old defensive end, and then we're just desperate trying to figure out who the stars of that team are.
So coming back over, let's Kansas City. You mentioned Pat Mahomes, and
The teams with some stars, yes.
See, that's more interesting, frankly. Pat Mahomes, super interesting. We all can't wait to see what he's going to be. There are a lot of really intriguing quarterback situations to play out, from your Case Keenums to figuring out how Kirk Cousins is going to replace him in Minnesota. Lots of really interesting things. And I've got to give a shout out to my guy, Teddy Bridgewater, who's going to be, I think, in a great situation to take over the Saints and run them for the next 10 years, as long as Coach Payton can stay around there. But Pat Mahomes, we had to look back to 2016 in college football to see what we could expect from there. And Pat Mahomes had the third most pass attempts in college football that year. So a ton of volume down in that air raid offense at Texas Tech. Amazing athlete. Obviously, we all know about him. Comes from the great lineage. He had over 5,000 yards that year, over 2,000 of those in the air, 41 touchdowns to just 10 interceptions, and 8.5 yards per attempt. So that results in 421 yards per game and an 116 IQR. Really awesome. And he's just ahead of one guy on our list, Deshaun Watson. Had the next amount of attempts that year. He had the fourth most pass attempts. They had the same number of completions at 388. Watson had 500 fewer yards, the same number of touchdowns at 41, and Watson had 17 interceptions to Mahomes' 10. Now, beware, we're talking about different defenses there. Texas Tech isn't playing nearly the defensive gauntlet that Clemson is, but in terms of their statistics projecting from that 2016 season, you see some bizarre similarities and guys that aren't too different in terms of being athletic quarterbacks that are really made for this modern NFL.
That's my biggest worry about Mahomes is how much has he seen tough defenses? Because I worry about those Big 12.
I think we got to worry about all of them, but hopefully we'll be getting some more evidence out here soon on how a few of these guys look.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, Mahomes, it's going to be a very different style of offense than what they had with Alex Smith. I mean, I realize Alex Smith threw deep last year more than he ever had before in his history. But with Mahomes, they're really going to go deep a lot.
And I'm looking forward to it. All right, on that note, Aaron, we will say goodbye. The Off the Charts Football Podcast is sponsored by Draft. The daily fantasy sports website allows you to enjoy the most fun part of fantasy sports, the draft, on any day of the year. With Draft, you get all the excitement of a snake draft with anywhere from 2 to 12 participants, and then your players compete. That's it. No need for researching salaries, monitoring the waiver wire, or waiting for the entire season to play out. With Draft, you can participate in daily, weekly, or season-long contests. Draft is easy. The average draft takes under 10 minutes, and since you're competing with real people, Draft gives you a better chance to win than in many of the other leading DFS websites. You can compete in football, baseball, basketball, hockey, golf, and more, and Draft offers easy, immediate cash payouts to all winners. Simply go to our special offer website at draft.com/offthecharts and sign up to receive a free entry. That's draft.com/offthecharts. And one more final note. Please rate and like our podcast wherever you get your podcast, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else. Please give us a like, leave a comment, and give us 5 stars. We'll be back next week with more.